For the past 2 weeks, I've been telling my audience that Prime Minister Mark Carney was working his way toward a deal with Alberta for a pipeline, maybe even more than one. The deal would probably include the rollback of regulations in return for a project. Premier Danielle Smith and the oil and gas industry have hated the oil and gas emissions cap, changes to the Environmental Assessment Act, and banning oil tankers off BC's northwest coast, among others, for a long, long time. Smith has dominated the Canadian energy conversation for the past 3 years with her constant carping and demands. It's clear to anyone paying attention that if Carney has any chance of implementing his build, build, build agenda, he has to have Smith and Alberta on board. You can't build national infrastructure in Canada or implement free trade between provinces if one of the big four provinces is opposed. Carney needs consensus. The only question is, what will he pay Smith to get it? Well, I got plenty of feedback, and many of you disagreed with me. Well, fair game. But Monday, at the First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon, we found out that there is indeed a grand bargain. Smith said it, and Carney agreed with her. The deal is a pipeline in exchange for installing carbon capture and storage on the Alberta oil sands.
Well, let's call it the grand bargain. That we know that there is a group of oil sands companies that have been advocating for some time for what they call the Pathways project, that would decarbonize the production of their bitumen through the use of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, ultimately using a hydroelectric or small modular nuclear to decarbonize, and then direct air capture for the last mile. I think the point I was making to the Prime Minister and my colleagues is that there's lots of ways to decarbonize, but the Pathways project is an expensive project. It would cost anywhere from $10 to $20 billion to get built. And to make the economic case for that, having more egress with more barrels to be sold to Asia is the way to pay for it. If we had a 1 million barrel a day pipeline going to the northwest BC coast, that would generate about $20 billion a year in revenues. And so that seems like a pretty good value proposition if both of those projects can proceed at once.
With the agreement we had as First Ministers back in March when we met in Ottawa, when we talked about energy and trade corridors. It had a little less focus because we hadn't translated that into a legislative initiative and more specifics about projects. But there is an ability to build that energy infrastructure, that oil pipeline. I'm going to refer to my earlier answer and to Premier Smith's answer moments ago about a grand bargain. Decarbonizing the barrels, various ways to do that. I agree with her, and so the opportunity is there.
Now, Smith is likely going to play Carney like a fiddle. Frankly, he needs her cooperation more than she needs his. Smith has spent 3 years demonizing Justin Trudeau's Liberal government, and I have no doubt she would happily spend another 3 years demonizing Carney. Hating Liberals is Alberta's provincial sport, and it plays well with her political base. Here's how it could play out. Pathways Alliance, the oil sands company's organization, proposed a $16.5 billion carbon trunk line and hub in northeast Alberta. Smith demanded Ottawa pay 75% of that cost. The Government of Canada provided an investment tax credit worth up to $8 billion. Plus an unknown amount that could be contributed from the $15 billion Canada Growth Fund in the form of contracts for difference, which are carbon price backstops and equity investments. There are a couple of smaller funds that might also play in this space. On top of federal support, Alberta provides a 12% subsidy for capital costs. We don't have the final numbers for government support, but it's likely edging pretty close to 75%. That would leave just $4 billion for the companies to pay, assuming Carney doesn't sweeten the pot to keep Smith happy. Now, I mentioned earlier that Smith has been demanding the rollback of Trudeau's regulations. Well, industry voices have become increasingly vocal over the past few months. They say that regulatory reform is an absolute minimum for the private sector to consider building a pipeline. So what choice does Carney have? Smith and the oil and gas industry have him over a barrel. If he wants their cooperation, he'll have to pay the price. And that is how Alberta wins everything.